I pointed out a while ago in another video that liberal Europeans have a disconnect between their politics and where they actually live and where they go on holiday. When they plan for a holiday in Tuscany, they have an image in their minds of what will be there, but it isn't one which has the refugees there that they campaigned to be placed there. So what we're dealing with is a disconnect between the ideal in our minds and then the material world. This isn't a new concept. Plato described it perfectly thousands of years ago with his allegory of the cave. And so John Cleese comments on London not being English anymore was akin to pointing out that he didn't believe in the shadows on the wall anymore. He isn't falling for it. He doesn't know who or what is projecting the shadows or why, but he's recognised that something is off. And in actual fact, this is an increasingly amount of people are recognising that something is off, but they have a hard time placing what it is because the ideal that we have of how we should be living as a people has been utterly sort of cut off by the people in the cloaks, by the people who are projecting the shadows on the wall. The purpose of the left is to force people to accept what they're seeing and to make sure nobody else questions the fake nature of the shadows. And so what we see is the clash of the ideal as it exists in the minds of European men and the ideal some of us think on the dissident right is that we want to have that ideal brought then into the material world. And of course the men who are projecting the shadows, they know that, which is why we're shut off all of the time from making any inroads and to having a voice. What we've actually got is the ideal and then the anti-ideal, and it's the anti-ideal which is in the material world. And that's actually the ideal of another group, of course. Now that John Cleese has been bullied by the media and the legions of drones they sent out, he seems to be dialing it back. It's just a cultural issue. It's just these particular shadows that he dislikes, but not the projection as a whole. But secretly he knows that something is off. And it's our job to supply all these people with the path out of the cave. I'll see you later, folks.
Today, we will be looking at some of the points made in a video by the channel Morgoth's Review. The video caught my interest because it talks about Plato's allegory of the cave, but misses the point of the allegory almost completely. But to understand that, one must first shed light on the surrounding discussion on immigration and multiculturalism. Morgoth's review talks about how the left's stance on the ethnic identity is riddled with contradictions. That is true, for the left does simultaneously want to celebrate both the loss of Englishness and celebrate the claim that Englishness does not exist as a thing in itself, aside from, let's say, the trade gained as a result of residence in England, to be precise. But that malicious dissonance of the left is only a minor point of overall discussion about validity of certain identities with respect to another. Morgoth's review says that an ideal exists which pretty much every Englishman carries in his mind, which is an ideal of Englishness. Here he goes wrong. An ideal, by definition, is ideal. It is at highest position among its contemporaries. Morgoth's review's assumption is based on the idea that if John Cleese really believed Englishness to be ideal, he would not be happy about its demise. But nor would be any other person. For those people who are criticizing Cleese over his comments, how it can be that they are fighting against their own ideal? They must either think that Englishness, as thought of by Cleese, is not an ideal, or they must not know what it actually is. Morgoth's review gives an example of Europeans having a disconnect, which he explains by asking us to think what they would be thinking when they plan a holiday to, let's say, Tuscany. That Tuscany does not contain the refugees for whom the Europeans advocate is the central point of the claim. Morgoth's review then links this to Plato's allegory of the cave, where he talks about how the people of Europe are seeing shadows projected by the puppet masters, which they take to be the real thing, and thus are kept in ignorance. He opines that the job of people on dissident right is to free these people from this bondage and bring the ideal they have in their mind to the material world. The issue with all this is that it commits the very mistake that Plato talks about, the mistake of thinking the unreal to be real. Cleese said, I suspect I should apologize for my affection for the Englishness of my upbringing, but in some ways I found it calmer, more polite, more humorous, less tabloid, and less money oriented than the one that is replacing it. I have never known any of those said, except perhaps humor, to be an English quality. UK has been on the forefront of pushing tabloids for decades, but even if it is not the world champion in it, it is obviously more adept at it than the countries and cultures where migrants are from. Similarly, the whole point of Western entrepreneurship and industrial development was orientation towards money. Not only that, Western nations take many of the top spots for having the highest household debt to GDP ratio, showing debt backed consumerism, which Morgoth's review himself talks about in his latest video. So he says that English people now want their identity back. All of this, a person of a keen eye knows, is consequentialism at its finest. The reason behind fighting back for this identity is because the same consumerism which the British enjoyed for centuries is now falling apart. The argument that British people like to live with their own peers contrasts the reality of British colonialism and imperialism. Whatever may be the morality of the imperialist tribes of Europeans, it does show that many of them were not hesitant to go to other countries where they would be minorities, as long as it was beneficial to them. And why would not they? This is true of a culture embodying the Faustian spirit. In Plato's allegory of the cave, the puppet masters, the deceivers, are not some secret group running the world, but the deceiver is the world itself. The British claim to identity is as fake as their clinging to the capitalist industrialist utopia, because both are of the world. The picture that Morgoth's review puts displaying perhaps the English citizenry is something I have never seen naturally in my acquaintance with the British media, independent or otherwise. Maybe it does represent some highly conservative rural county, but that is all. The problem with this play of European identity is the same as the problem with feminism. Feminism talks about the sisterhood of all women, but the fake sense of belonging does not change the fact that many culprits of feminism are ideally women themselves. Similarly, the many culprits of lack of British identity are Britishers themselves. So, how can one form a common group with them based on British identity? But the reason for existence of both the collectives is the same, the material benefit they see. Plato's thesis is an attack on that idea itself. Our own material instincts make us run from one truth to the other, though neither of these truths are true. What is true is a world of forms. Thus, all material endeavors are necessarily futile.